We start in England in 1536, where the first black queen of England, what wasn't black but now is because reasons, is still haunted by her unfortunate stillbirth last month, and soon worries that people are turning against her, especially now the doctor says she's unlikely to be able to conceive again after 3 miscarriages in a friggin' row. Anyway, her hubby King Henry is still away at Westminster doing royally things, and seemingly couldn't even be bothered to come back and see how his wife was doing after suffering the death of their new child. And her ginger uncle soon warns her to tread carefully upon his return, 'cause he's well upset he still ain't got an heir, and so he's feeling pretty fragile right about now. And the last thing you want to do is push him into the warm, comforting bosom of that pretty white Jane Seymour bird. In the meantime, phony fakey African Anne tries to keep up appearances, and mainly by washing the manky old trotters of the local plebs, when suddenly some nutty white supremacist bursts in and tries to shank the stunning and brave first black English queen, what was never black but now is because woke virtue signalling, and reckons she's not really legitimate given she was just some mistress what Henry got with behind the former queen's back. So the dopey failed assassin, who literally just took a shot at the queen and fucking missed, is promptly dragged out and taken off to the tower to get deaded, whilst George gets his ethnic sis the heck out of Dodge, before the rest of the public totally turn on him and all. A little later and she visits her baby daughter, and to make sure she's safe from the festering hate of the white community. But it turns out her own mixed-race infant has already been radicalised by the far right, and immediately has a hateful meltdown at the sight of her chocolate mama, what she ain't seen in months. Yeah, first the xenophobic horse last week, and now her own bubba. No wonder everyone thinks England's not very inclusive when it comes to meeting the more exotic types. And just as she thinks her day can't get any worse, the visiting Spanish ambassador totally ghosts her when she tries to say hello, and then flat out defies the direct order to come back and stop being such a bloody rude git. But much like the stinky plebs, he also doesn't recognise her as the true queen, and neither does Henry's first daughter, Princess Mary, given her new stepmother was just a random servant who jumped into the proper queen's marital bed and then practically celebrated her death, and naturally thinks her stepmum's a right bleeding traitor. And so then brags about how Cromwell is worming his way in with the ambassador to secure Mary's succession, given the queen's now been rendered totally barren by all her previous miscarriages. Or some she. So she later confronts Cromwell about potentially having possibly maybe promised the ambassador an alliance with Spain in exchange for acknowledging Mary's line of succession as a true queen. Because her far-right racist baby what hates her guts is next in line to the throne. But he just says, I ain't done nothing or nothing, bitch, so shut up about it already. That evening, she invites one of her pregnant handmaids to join her in bed, and before you can say, someone better get the lube out, boys, because looks like we're about to see some more interracial lesbo scissoring going on. But unfortunately, they just sit and talk, and this Lizzie bird soon confesses that she's been having a super secret affair with Anne's brother George, and she's got a DNA test from Jeremy Kyle confirming that the baby is totally his and she.
I didn't become a little bit of a slag. I became a total slag.
Naturally, Anne reckons it'd be a bit of a fucking scandal if it came out that her married brother's been slinging it up some random Asian-y handmaid just because his moody wife has a nasty case of resting bitch face 24/7. And worse, they can't really afford any more heat now their family's position is vulnerable and their influence totally waning. So she better keep stum and just pretend it's her husband's sprog. But Lizzie says her hubby's going to totally know it ain't his because they ain't shagged in months. But Anne just shrugs and says you just got to do that lying thing, girl. Or maybe just pretend that you're another one of them Virgin Mary type ladies. Though how she's meant to explain a half Asian, half black baby, I don't know. Because it's one thing to pretend you got impregnated by an invisible creator what you've never even met, but quite another to then imply that God was essentially a rapey black man who impregnated you without your consent. Anyway, the next day and the King of England returns, and just can't believe that useless woman who he's been avoiding for weeks is just casually sitting on his throne whilst also dressed like a mint chocolate arrow. But she just apologises for letting him down, and then manipulates him into defending her and her daughter's succession by mentioning the sneaky coup thing what's currently going on between Cromwell and the Spanish ambassador fella. And now having easily triggered his ego, she convinces him to have Spain be made to recognise her as queen, and for them to stop bloody undermining their marriage already. So, at the next court meeting, the Spanish ambassador proposes that England be their mate and totally stick two fingers up to France when shit eventually kicks off, and in return, they'll all be allies and totally recognise his marriage to his Spanish ex Catherine of Aragon, despite her already being dead for 3 friggin' years. And naturally, the hot-headed Henry fella just can't believe this Spanish prick is pretending his super spicy new ebony queen ain't just standing 3 feet in front of him, and says that Mary will never succeed to the throne given she's an illegitimate bastard and not remotely as far-right and racist as his other baby girl. Some shit. And after the ambassador implies that Cromwell had made shady, unauthorised promises behind his master's back, the king promptly bollocks them both.
Don't look at him! Look at me!
And then tells Crommers to sling his hook, given he's clearly forgotten his place and gotten far too big for his boots and stuff. Because plotting behind his back and then scheming about in his own house without his consent just ain't fucking on, son. After having successfully humiliated that Cromwell fucker and also manipulated her dopey hubby into getting everything she ever wanted, the Queen dances the night away at a fancy ball. And for a minute, everything seems pretty sweet, yo. Until she notices Henry keep looking that Seymour bird up and down and salivating like she's a juicy leg of ham. And just can't believe it when she sees her getting a secret gift being delivered in a small hallway. And then overhearing how Jane don't really want no stinking trinkets from her lover boy king, and will instead only accept a marriage invitation from Henry if he's serious about their relationship. Because she's a girl who knows her worth and totally wants commitment, bro. Later, Anne returns upstairs and gets proper steaming. And after interrupting her brother having a passive-aggressive Barney with his frigid wife, and also almost outing him as her aged and handmade secret baby daddy, lol, ooks, she proceeds to drunkenly flirt with the king's closest courtier and personal advisor, Mr. Norris, and playfully implies that he's totally got a crush on her fine-ass black booty. And naturally, he suddenly panics when he realises he's now got to either treasonously say that he thinks the king's wife is super hot, or otherwise imply that he don't find her attractive at all and that she's a proper minger. And although she tries to apologise to him when she sobers up the next morning, he don't really appreciate being put in a position where whatever he responds with could put his head on the chopping block for trying to seduce the king's wife or for literal treason after insulting one of England's monarchs. And he's just yet another one of the castle's inhabitants what she's managed to piss off and totally alienate with a hostile personality and repellent arrogant attitude.
No!
Lizzie then tells her that the king has moved his top totty tart Jane Seymour into lodgings that connect directly to his own bedchambers. And before she can say,
What a fucking liberty.
she heads off to confront him, and soon gets into a raging Barney with the literal King of England, who says that he don't really want a female birthing person who can't birth him a boy to succeed him, and that she was really nothing without him anyway. Which totally triggers her into slapping him up like a little bitch, and which then soon escalates into a full-on domestic, as this straight white bloke who's filled with toxic masculinity starts choking an ethnic minority lady in the middle of the night.
Uh-oh, spaghetti-o!
And after he comes back to his senses and totally lets her be, she just calls him pathetic after essentially getting a taste of her own medicine and being cheated on with another mistress.
Not a great plan.
And before you can say, it's probably not a good idea to emasculate the alpha male monarch nor piss off the hot-headed king what can chop your noggin off at a moment's notice, especially when he already has his eye on marrying another bird and is quite clearly just waiting for any little excuse to get rid of you, we cut to the next morning, as in a shocking twist what no one could ever see coming. She's promptly served a warrant for her arrest, given she smacked up the reigning sovereign of her own country the previous night, and is soon escorted off to the Tower of London for trial, as a gloating Tommy Cromwell can barely hide his smug and satisfied smile now she's essentially getting a swift dose of karma for mugging him off in the middle of court the other day. And that's it. That's episode 2. But man, I'm just so worried about my girl Limbo. I mean, the poor broad has been through hell. And I, for one, hope she gets to live happily ever after with the reigning King of England, what was infamously fat and ginger but now ain't, also because reasons. Gah! Lucky this is all just fiction and we have no possible way of possibly knowing how all this possibly ends. Huh? Vicky, what? Spoilers, bro! But anyway, let's go and find out, shall we? On to episode 3. We start in London in the May of 1536, as the first Black Queen of England, what wasn't black but now is because reasons, is taken to the Tower to await her trial after being accused of doing a bunch of bad things, like being insufferably smarmy and also emasculating the literal fucking king.
Nice.
Anyway, in an absolute affront to Western democratic principles everywhere, the Tower guards and maids treat her like she's already guilty, and also make her piss in a bucket for shits and giggles. And after spending cold nights all alone locked up in a little room and suffering from what I presume are claustrophobic nightmares and stuff, she's eventually visited by old Tommy Cromwell, who's just loving watching her being cooped up in a cage and also doing tinkles in a small bucket. He says she's charged with treason and adultery, and to make the baseless accusations more believable, this manipulative scheming git has also indicted a few other of her acquaintances, including perfectly innocent Mr. Norris, and even her random lute player. Liberties! And given Cromwell is one heck of a spiteful brick, he's also gone and had her brother arrested on suspicion of having incestuous relations with his own sister, aka the first Black Queen of England, what wasn't black but now is because reasons.
No way!
Yes, fucking way. And she just can't believe he'd stoop this low just to secure a conviction and also get his revenge for her making him look like a right mug in public court by exposing his backroom schemes last epi. So naturally, she tells him to sling his hook, before having a full-on meltdown and screaming to see her husband. You know, the bloke what put her there in the first place and clearly wants nothing more to do with her after she slapped him that one time and also fucked up her one job of giving him an heir, and not once but 3 fucking times in a row. Anyway, the next morning, some caramel tart called Madge turns up to update the disgraced queen on her daughter Elizabeth, who's still totally safe and well at Hatfield, so chill out, bro. But suddenly, the guard bursts in and says those other chumps what Cromwell stitched up have just been found guilty on all charges and are now totally deaded. And worse, he says her trial's now been scheduled for 2 days' time. And naturally, her mate Madge is freaking out, because there ain't no way they're going to be able to get a lawyer out here and up to speed at that short notice, because they ain't got high-speed trains or Bugatti Chirons here in the 16th century. So Madge suggests immediately writing up their defence themselves. But Anne hilariously just channels the spirit of a high school student who forgot about his midnight paper deadline and just says, chillax, bro, because I'll totally wing it and stuff. And besides, that godfella will help me say the right things to totally prove my innocence, so shut up about it already. And before she can say, this'll end well, her trial begins, as Crombo smugly lays out all the bad things she's meant to have done, like shagging around with a bunch of randos she's barely heard of, and also even seducing her own brother. And to prove it, he brings in 2 witnesses to totally throw her under the bus, including her sister-in-law Jane, what has that nasty case of perpetual resting bitch face, and also her brother's agent Floozy, who he secretly impregnated a few weeks back. And Anne just can't believe these lot would stab her in the back and make up a pack of lies just to secure a false conviction based on 0 evidence but dodgy testimonies, and also thereby bringing an English court of law into disrepute. Because not even the British Post Office would stoop that low.
Bruh.
So when it's her time to defend herself, she summons the Holy Spirit to guide her words. And although she pleads not guilty to all the charges and reckons she didn't do nothing guv, the libtard writers suddenly remember that she's a black-skinned African in a majority white Western court, and so is immediately convicted on all charges. And before she can totally play the race card and say you're all just a bunch of hateful racialists, she's soon sentenced to death by the axeman's axe. Later that evening, she's visited by the Archbishop on behalf of King Henry, who totally wants an annulment given he reckons she tricked him into marriage and their union is thus illegitimate and stuff. And she suddenly realises that he just wants to have their daughter Lizzie removed from the line of succession so that any and all of his future sprogs can be totally made his successors. Especially if he ever finally gets a boy what he keeps banging on about wanting so bad. And naturally, she don't really want to sabotage her daughter's future just to please her ex who's also trying to get her killed. But apparently, Henry's now offering to instead send her off to live in a literal nunnery, and have little Lizzie well looked after if she just signs the bloody annulment already, and also admit that she totally seduced him via witchcraft or some shit. So, against her better judgment, she eventually cucks, and totally signs it in the belief and mutual understanding that her death sentence will be stayed and her kid will be totally A-OK.
You're so naive.
Later that night, she sees her brother George get taken to the gallows and says a final goodbye to the guy who's the only actually guilty one around here and who legitimately committed adultery, so probably deserves what he's about to get. The next morning, she mourns her broski's loss with Madge and copes hard by saying, well, at least we've got that 60 years in a nunnery life to look forward to, Gil. Until the guard bursts in again with some more bad news. And before she can say, your wife must fucking hate it every time you come through the door, pal, she's soon informed that they're constructing the scaffold for her execution tomorrow morning. Causing a shocking twist, what no one could ever see coming. Turns out the infamous manipulator, what totally loves manipulating people, and who she called out multiple times for maliciously manipulating people, has totally manipulated her. And now she's signed away her own legacy and her daughter's claim to the throne for the sum total of diddly and squat.
Shame.
And after telling her arch nemesis Tommy Crumcrom that he's actually a bit of a cunt, she just can't believe that her demise has been scheduled for 9 AM and doesn't even get a friggin' lie in before she has to go meet that godfella what totally screwed her in court by giving her shit words to say in her defence and what eventually led to her getting convicted on all charges.
No!
So after doing some more coping and telling herself that at least she now gets to see her race swap philandering brother again real soon, the first Black Queen of England, what wasn't black but is now, so just deal with it, bitch, is promptly led out to the scaffold in front of the local plebs, where her own executioner hilariously asks for her forgiveness and she totally gives it, and just says thanks love, before then asking her to get on her knees but not in a good way, and then totally lops her noggin off.
I don't care what universe you're from. That's gotta hurt.
And we end with Cromer's Tomwell walking off in smug satisfaction at a job well done, as the final expo dump of concluding title card explains how that horny Henry fella asked his floozy to marry him barely 24 hours after his ex got whacked.
What?
And much like current day Disney, constantly pouring millions into woke movie budgets and what just always end up making historic losses at the box office, this broad must have some sort of learning disability. Because Jane Seymour either didn't see or else totally ignored all the raging alarm bells given she went and actually married him 11 days later. Gah, now don't come crying to me when he inevitably gets bored of you and has his henchmen totally stitch you up and gets you beheaded on phony fakey charges. But leaving us with some good news for a change, it also states that young daughter Elizabeth eventually grew out of being a far-right racist baby what throws a hissy fit every time she's around black people, and was totally reinstated after a succession crisis, and went on to be a femcel boss bitch what totally don't need no man, and one of the baddest bitches England's ever known. And that's it, that's the last epi. Though my favourite part was how the writers totally did away with Anne's famous final grovelling speech just before she died. In the flattest ending since that time my uncle got run over by a heavy-duty grass roller whilst out sunbathing at the local park.
Damn!
But at the end of the day, I guess I kinda now get why they decided to race swap my girl BOLEYN and her brother Big G. Because it works pretty well with the metaphor of the pair being gradually marginalised, constantly othered, and suffering all sorts of daily microaggressions from a society that never really saw them as legitimate and had totally turned against them. And I guess also because it ticks all sorts of DEI checkboxes for Channel 5 and brings with it manufactured controversy for media buzz and free promotion.
Smart.
Oh, I don't know. I guess I'm just bummed that the last epi didn't even give us a face-to-face reunion between the first Black Queen of England, what wasn't black but now is because reasons, and the reigning King of England, what was infamously fat and ginger but now ain't, also because reasons. But anyway, that's a plot and that's your lot. Considering that bail thing so you don't miss any future recaps. Tell me if you like this series in the comments if you have time, and I'll race swap you in the next one.